She was running for her life, her heels echoing through the marble halls of Seoul Central Court. One wrong move and the mafia would find her. But when she collided with a cold-blooded CEO at the courthouse steps, their mixed-up documents became her salvation and his nightmare. A marriage contract signed by mistake. A year-long deal forged in desperation. What began as a business arrangement transformed into something neither of them saw coming. As she brought warmth into his frozen world, he became the shield against her violent past. But when her abuser discovered she was protected by the most powerful man in Seoul, the stakes escalated beyond their control. Love isn't always a choice. Sometimes it's a survival mechanism. Sometimes it's a war. This is the story of Tamara and Sang-hun, a woman who fought to be free, a man who learned to feel, and a contract that became everything. Subscribe now to witness the passion, the danger, and the destiny that awaits. The fluorescent lights of the Seoul Central Court flickered overhead, casting harsh shadows across the polished marble floors. Tamara's lungs burned as she pushed through the heavy glass doors, her designer heels, the same ones Manshik had bought her, the ones she'd never liked, clicking against the stone with each desperate stride. Her breath came in short, sharp gasps. Behind her, she could hear voices. Men's voices. They were searching the floors above, but they would reach the ground level soon. She had maybe 3 minutes. Her phone vibrated in her clutched purse. Another message from Manshik. Where are you, baby? Come home. We need to talk. The word baby made her skin crawl. It had once sounded like endearment. Now it sounded like a chain. Tamara ducked into the crowded corridor where morning court sessions were beginning. Lawyers in dark suits moved in practiced formations, their briefcases creating a buffer of normalcy around her. She forced herself to walk slower, to blend in, to become invisible. Her charcoal blouse was torn at the shoulder. She'd ripped it escaping Manshik's penthouse apartment when he'd grabbed her arm hard enough to leave finger-shaped bruises. Her makeup was smudged. Her hair, usually meticulously styled, fell in disarray around her face. She looked like someone who'd been through a war. Because she had been. Tamara had spent the last 3 years in a war with one man. It had started with flowers and expensive dinners, with promises whispered in Korean she didn't fully understand but wanted to believe. Manshik had been charming then, a businessman with connections, a man who could open doors. He'd seemed like an opportunity when she'd arrived in Seoul with a dream and a suitcase. She'd been designing clothes for small boutiques, barely scraping by, living in a studio apartment the size of a closet. When Manshik appeared at one of her fashion shows and asked her to dinner, she'd said yes without hesitation. She'd been naive enough to believe in second chances. The first warning sign came on their 4th date when he'd questioned who she'd been texting. The second came when he'd insisted on paying for everything, her apartment, her phone bill, her materials, until she was financially dependent on him. The third came the night he'd held her wrist too tight and asked where she'd been, why she hadn't answered his calls, if she was seeing someone else. By then, it was too late to leave quietly. He'd made sure of that. A hand grabbed her elbow, and Tamara's heart nearly stopped. She spun around, ready to fight, but it was only an elderly woman in a court clerk's uniform. "Excuse me, dear, are you all right? You look frightened," the woman said in Korean accented English. For a moment, Tamara considered telling her everything. This woman could call security. This woman could help. But what if Manshik had already reached them? What if his money had already corrupted the right people? That was the thing about abusers with resources. They didn't just control you. They controlled your access to help. "I'm fine, thank you," Tamara whispered, pulling her arm gently away. "Just nervous about my case." The woman smiled sympathetically and released her. Tamara kept walking. The atrium opened before her, the heart of the courthouse, where multiple hallways intersected in a chaotic symphony of human movement. This was her best chance. Too many people, too many directions to run, too difficult to track. She veered left toward the civil contracts section, passing through another set of doors where lawyers bundled in conversation didn't give her a second glance. Behind her, she heard the elevator ding. Footsteps. Deep voices speaking rapid Korean into phones. They were close now. So close she could almost smell the cologne one of them wore, the same expensive brand Manshik always used. Her skin prickled with terror. Tamara turned a corner and nearly collided with someone. She would have fallen if not for the steady hand that caught her arm. "Careful," a man's voice said, cool and composed. She looked up into a face that stopped her breath. Not from attraction, though the man was undeniably beautiful in an icy, calculated way. His features were sharp and aristocratic, his eyes a dark brown that seemed to catalog her in a single glance. He wore a tailored charcoal suit that probably cost more than her monthly rent. His hair was perfectly styled. His expression was unreadable. But it was his aura that truly stopped her, the way the world seemed to organize itself around him. Even in the chaos of the courthouse, people unconsciously moved out of his path. Authority radiated from him like heat. "I'm sorry," Tamara started, but the footsteps behind her were getting louder. "Sang-hun, the board wants final signatures before the merger announcement," a younger man said, appearing beside the CEO with a leather portfolio clutched to his chest. Sang-hun, because it was clear this was Sang-hun, whoever he was still looking at Tamara with that penetrating stare. There was something in his expression that suggested he saw her. Not the way men usually saw her, as a beautiful woman, an accessory, a possession. But actually saw her. The panic in her eyes. The bruises on her wrists. The desperate calculation behind her fear. "Excuse me," Tamara said, trying to move past him. But in her desperation, she stumbled. Her purse flew from her hands. Documents scattered across the marble floor like leaves. His documents, her documents, the intern's documents, all mixing together in a waterfall of white and cream-colored paper. Sang-hun knelt immediately, moving with economic precision. The interns scrambled to help. Within seconds, they were gathering the scattered pages, sorting through them with the practiced efficiency of people accustomed to managing chaos. "Here," the intern said, holding out a stack of papers to Tamara. She took them gratefully, shoving them into her purse. Behind her, the footsteps had paused. She could hear Manshik's men conferring, probably asking other people if they'd seen a woman matching her description. They were still searching the wrong corridor. But not for long. "Thank you," she said quickly to Sang-hun, backing away. "Wait," he said, his voice stopping her like a physical force. "I believe these are mine." He held up a stack of papers, official documents, she realized, with seals and signatures. She'd grabbed them by mistake. In her panic, she'd shoved his marriage contract, the one sitting in this courthouse to be notarized, into her purse. "I'm sorry," she said, reaching for them. But the footsteps were closer now. Louder. She could hear Manshik's name being shouted. He was here. In the building. Without thinking, without processing what she was doing, Tamara ran. She bolted past Sang-hun, past the intern, down the corridor that led deeper into the courthouse. Behind her, she heard Sang-hun call out, his tone now urgent. "Security. There's a disturbance." But she was already gone, racing down a service stairwell, her heels creating a cacophony of sound that would give away her location if anyone cared to listen. The papers from Sang-hun's marriage contract, the ones she'd accidentally grabbed, were still in her purse. She didn't realize it yet. She was too focused on one thing and one thing only, survival. The service exit opened onto a side street she'd never seen before. Souls sprawled around her, vast and indifferent. She could disappear here. She could become nothing. The thought was almost liberating. It took 6 hours for her to realize she wasn't just being paranoid. When she finally sat down in a noribang, a private karaoke room in Gangnam that tourists rarely frequented, and opened her purse, she found not just her own documents but his. The marriage contract. The notarized signatures. The official seals from Seoul Central Court. She stared at the papers for a long moment, then she laughed. Actually laughed, a hysterical sound that echoed off the soundproof walls. Of all the chaos, all the desperation, all the running, she'd accidentally grabbed the marriage documents of the most powerful man she'd ever collided with. It should have been funny. It wasn't. Because as she sat there, alone in a rented room with only a microphone and a screen playing K-pop videos, she realized something terrifying. She was homeless. She had no money. Her credit cards were tied to Manshik's accounts. Her apartment was in his building. Her friends had either been scared away by him or had chosen his money over her friendship. She had a passport, a phone with a dying battery, the clothes on her back, and a torn marriage contract that belonged to a stranger. She also had, unbeknownst to her, a legal marriage certificate sitting in a courthouse filing system. The seals had been genuine. The signatures had been witnessed. In the chaos of the morning, when she'd grabbed Sang-hun's documents, the intern, young, overworked, and running on coffee, had already filed the paperwork. What she'd stolen by accident was now legally binding. 2 weeks later, Tamara was living in a capsule hotel in a bad part of Seoul, working illegally as a seamstress in an underground workshop where no one asked questions and no one paid taxes. She'd managed to avoid manship by staying mobile, by never staying in one place too long, by keeping her phone off for most of the day. But money was running out. The few thousand won she'd had saved in a hidden account was being depleted rapidly. She had maybe 10 days before she'd be sleeping on the street. She'd tried to go to the police once. The officer had listened to her story with a sympathetic expression, had taken her statement, and had then very gently explained that without proof of Manshik's abuse, without witnesses, without photographs of injuries she couldn't provide because the bruises had faded, without recordings of his threats that she'd been too terrified to document, there wasn't much they could do. He was a businessman. She was a foreigner with questionable immigration status. Her visa was tied to employment she no longer had. Come back when he actually does something criminal, the officer had suggested, with genuine kindness. As if the psychological torture, the financial control, the threats, the isolation, didn't count. She'd left that police station feeling more hopeless than when she'd entered. On the 14th day of her new life as a ghost, her phone buzzed. It was a number she didn't recognize. She almost didn't answer, but desperation made her brave. Miss Tamara? A man's voice, formal and professional. This is Park Ji-ho, calling from the law offices of Kong and Associates. We represent Mr. Sang-hun regarding a matter of significant importance. Tamara's stomach dropped. Had Sang-hun reported the documents? Was she in legal trouble? I'm sorry about the mix-up at the courthouse, she said quickly. I can pay for any damages or... Miss Tamara, I need to inform you that you and Mr. Sang-hun are currently married. The words didn't make sense. She waited for the lawyer to explain, but he continued with the tone of someone who had delivered this information before and found it tedious. Due to an administrative error at Seoul Central Court, your signatures and Mr. Sang-hun's signatures were combined on a single marriage certificate instead of separate contracts. The marriage was officially registered yesterday. It is currently legal and binding. That can't be. Tamara couldn't find words. I didn't sign anything. I don't even know him. Nevertheless, the certificate is valid. Mr. Sang-hun is prepared to offer you several options. You can meet with him to discuss resolution, or we can proceed with an annulment, which will take approximately 4 to 6 months and will require your cooperation and signature. Can't we just... Why do I need to meet him? There was a pause. Mr. Sang-hun specifically requested that you come to his office. He has information he believes will be of personal importance to you. He has also asked that you bring identification. The lawyer gave her an address in Gangnam, one of the most exclusive business districts in Seoul. She knew where it was. She'd walked past that building before, back when she'd been dating Manshik, and he'd taken her shopping on the streets below. The building looked like it had been designed by someone who'd never experienced human emotion. She almost threw her phone away, almost decided to just disappear, to catch the first flight back to Nigeria and try to rebuild her life. But desperation, that stubborn unwillingness to give up, made her show up 3 days later in the same charcoal blouse she'd been wearing the day she fled, now cleaned, but still bearing the ghost of that torn shoulder seam. The elevator to the top floor of Sang-hun's building moved in silence. The polished steel walls reflected her image back at her, and she barely recognized the woman staring back. She'd lost weight. Her eyes had taken on a haunted quality. She looked like someone who'd been hunted. The elevator doors opened onto a floor that seemed designed to intimidate. Floor-to-ceiling windows looked out over Seoul. The furniture was all sharp angles and expensive minimalism. Behind a sleek desk sat a receptionist who looked at Tamara's worn clothing with barely concealed disdain. I have an appointment with Mr. Sang-hun, Tamara said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. He's expecting you, the receptionist said, which made it worse somehow. Like she was anticipated. Like her arrival had been filed away in someone's calendar with the same care you'd give to a dentist appointment. The office was larger than her old apartment. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed the sprawling city below, thousands of lives happening simultaneously, and here she was, standing in the office of a man who'd become her accidental husband through a clerical error. Sang-hun stood with his back to her, hands clasped behind his back, looking out at the city like he owned it. Maybe he did. "Miss Tamara," he said without turning around. "Thank you for coming." "Your lawyer said you had information," she said. "Something personal." "Yes." He finally turned to face her, and she was struck again by the otherness of him, the way he seemed to exist on a different plane than ordinary people. "I had my team investigate the situation. The courthouse error was indeed an error, but it was compounded by your hasty departure." "I was in trouble," she said quietly. He studied her for a moment, his dark eyes taking in her appearance, the way she held herself, the fear still hovering around the edges of her composure. Whatever he saw seemed to shift something in his expression, not warmth exactly, but a recalibration. "You were running from someone," he said. "It wasn't a question." "I don't think that's relevant." "It is." He moved toward her, and she fought the instinct to back away. "My background check revealed that you have an outstanding restraining order petition filed by a Manshik Kim. A man with known connections to organized crime. A man who, 3 days ago, was questioned by authorities in connection with an arson at the workshop where you were employed." The room tilted. Manshik had burned down the workshop? The thought should have terrified her, should have confirmed everything she feared. Instead, she felt something like validation. He was capable of that. He was dangerous. Everyone who'd tried to help her, everyone who'd told her she was overreacting or being dramatic, they would see now. "He's looking for me," she said. "Yes." Sang-hun moved to his desk and pulled up a file on his computer. "He's been making inquiries. Throwing money around. He's hired private investigators. He's been to your old apartment building 3 times. He's even attempted to contact the fashion boutique you worked with, claiming he was a concerned friend." "Oh God," Tamara whispered. "But here's what he doesn't know," Sang-hun continued, his tone taking on an edge of something she couldn't quite identify. "Perhaps ruthlessness. Perhaps protection. My name carries weight and soul that his money cannot match. My company has resources that he cannot access. My connections reach into places his reach cannot." He walked around to the front of his desk and leaned against it, creating a more casual posture, though nothing about him was truly casual. "I'm prepared to offer you a solution." "The annulment," she said, though the words sounded hollow. "No." He studied her face carefully. "A marriage." She laughed, actually laughed, the sound shocking in the quiet office. "We already tried that. A real one. A year-long contract. You become my wife publicly. You move into my residence. You attend functions with me. You become untouchable because you belong to a man more powerful than he is. And in exchange, I provide you with protection, resources, and a legal status that allows you to work without fear." Tamara's mind struggled to process the words. "Why would you do that?" "You don't know me." "No," he agreed. "I don't. But I recognize someone in crisis. And I have a very practical reason for agreeing. My board has been pressuring me to marry. The merger I was handling the day you literally collided with me has been complicated by the impression that I'm unstable. Too focused on work. Unmarried CEOs are viewed with suspicion. Romantically unavailable makes them seem cold and ruthless. Aren't you?" she asked. "Precisely." A ghost of something humor, perhaps, crossed his features. "But the world prefers the illusion of humanity. You can provide that illusion. We sign a contract. 1 year. At the end, we divorce amicably. You'll have resources, legal status, and most importantly, freedom from the man hunting you because he'll have found it impossible to reach you. And if I say no? Then you leave here, go back to hiding in capsule hotels and illegally operated workshops, eventually run out of money, and when Manshik finds you, and he will find you, Ms. Tamara, these things are inevitable. You'll be alone and without resources. Or," he paused, "you could try the police again, which we both know will be ineffective. Or you could return to Nigeria. I'm sure your family would take you in." She thought of her mother's disappointed face. Her father's lectures about moving to Seoul being a mistake. The shame of returning defeated. The impossibility of rebuilding anything in a place where everyone knew her as the girl who'd run away chasing dreams. "What's the contract?" she asked. "Written terms. Reasonable ones. We remain married for 1 year. You'll have access to my accounts for personal needs, not excessive amounts, but enough to live comfortably. You'll attend public events with me. You'll dress appropriately. I'll provide clothing allowance. We maintain separate residences within my penthouse, private spaces. No tabloid-worthy romance. You're my wife, not my partner." The way he said it was clinical, but there was something underneath the words. A man who knew how to compartmentalize. A man who could separate the personal from the practical. "If I agree," Tamara said slowly, "I want to continue designing. I want to build my fashion line. It was something I was creating before. Before you were controlled by a man with questionable moral boundaries?" He didn't say it unkindly. "Yes. I'll provide startup capital. Consider it a business arrangement within a business arrangement. You need protection and a chance to rebuild. I need appearances satisfied. It's practical for both of us." She should have walked out. Should have run from this elegant, cold man who was offering her a life that sounded like something from a dark fairy tale. She should have been smarter than to accept a deal with a stranger just because the alternative was worse. But she'd been running on fear and desperation for so long that the idea of just stopping, of having somewhere safe to sleep, of having breathing room, it was too tempting to refuse. "If I get hurt," she said, "if he finds me despite your protection." "He won't." Sang-hun's voice took on an edge of absolute certainty. "Because if he does, I have resources far less legitimate than the police. I have people who solve problems without asking questions. And I don't appreciate people threatening what is mine." The possessive language should have bothered her. Instead, it was almost comforting. To be someone's property in this moment, with this man, seemed safer than being no one's anything. 1 year, she said. 1 year, he confirmed. "I want copies of everything. The contract, the terms." "Of course." He lifted his phone and spoke into it. "Prepare the marriage contract renewal documents and the residential arrangement agreement. Have both ready for signature within the hour." He ended the call and looked back at Tamara. "You can read them here. Have a lawyer review them if you'd like. My office has a number you can call. But I suspect you'll find them fair. I don't make agreements I'm not willing to stand by, and I expect my partners to hold themselves to the same standard." The word partners shifted something in her understanding of the situation. This wasn't a man taking advantage of a desperate woman. This was a transaction between two people who needed something from each other. The dignity of that framing was unexpected. "When do I move in?" she asked. "Tonight, if you'd like. I'll have my assistant arrange everything. Your previous life ends. Your new one begins. You'll need to understand that once you're in my world, you stay in my world. The paparazzi will follow. The reporters will question. Your past will be dug up and examined. But they'll do it from outside the glass. They won't touch you." She nodded, understanding what he was really saying. Once she entered into this arrangement, there was no going back easily. No changing her mind halfway through, because she missed her old life. She was choosing a prison, albeit a comfortable one, over the chaos of freedom. But sometimes, prisons kept predators out as well as in. The penthouse was exactly what she'd expected, cold, expensive, designed by someone who'd never lived in it so much as existed within it. Everything was in shades of black, white, and gray. The furniture looked like it had been selected for aesthetic value rather than comfort. The art on the walls was abstract enough to be meaningless. It was a space that had never been loved, only maintained. Her rooms were on the opposite end of the penthouse from Sang-hun's. She had a bedroom, a bathroom, and a small studio space that had been hastily converted for her use. The window overlooked the city lights, a view that made her feel simultaneously elevated and imprisoned. She unpacked the few belongings she owned into closets that could have held her entire old apartment. A woman named Min-jae, who managed Sang-hun's household, arrived with new clothing, professional but elegant pieces, nothing too revealing, nothing that would distract from the narrative of devoted wife. She also brought cosmetics, toiletries, and basic necessities. "Mr. Sang-hun is dining at 8 p.m., Min-jae informed her in Korean accented English. "The dress is business casual. You'll dine together in the main room tonight, so we can photograph you for the announcement." "There's going to be a press announcement?" Tamara asked. "Of course." The marriage must be public and immediate to be effective against. Min-jae hesitated, clearly aware that she shouldn't speak too directly about the situation. Against the man looking for me, Tamara finished. Yes. Mr. Sang-hun has already released a statement to the media about his surprise marriage. The story is that you met 6 months ago and fell in love quietly. The wedding was private. He wants to surprise the world with the announcement of both the marriage and the merger, showing that his personal life is stable and fulfilled. It was a good story. The kind that would circulate through the business press and then fade into the background of celebrity gossip. Sang-hun, one of Seoul's most eligible bachelors, marrying a mysterious foreign designer. It checked all the boxes for tabloid interest. At 8 p.m., Tamara walked into the dining room wearing a charcoal dress that made her feel both beautiful and like an imposter. Sang-hun was already there, in a suit that somehow looked even more expensive than the one he'd worn that day at the courthouse. The table was long enough for 10 people. There were candles. It looked like a romantic dinner. It felt like a business meeting. You look appropriate, he said, pulling out the chair for her. Thank you, she said, unsure if that was a compliment. They ate in relative silence for the first course. Expensive food that tasted like nothing. Tamara found herself studying him when she thought he wasn't looking. There was something about his detachment that intrigued her. It wasn't coldness exactly, more like a man who'd learned to separate himself from his emotions so thoroughly that they'd become theoretical concepts rather than real things. Your past, he said suddenly, setting down his fork. I need to know the important parts. Not for judgment. For strategy. If the media digs, I need to know what they'll find. So she told him. About arriving in Seoul 5 years ago with a design degree and a dream. About the small jobs, the boutiques, the barely scraping by. About Manshik appearing at her fashion show like a rescue. About the slow decay of her autonomy, so gradual she hadn't noticed it happening until she was completely trapped. She told him about the night he'd held her wrist and told her she was his now. She belonged to him. He'd made her relevant, and she owed him everything. She told him about the night she'd tried to leave for the first time, and he'd driven her to a bridge and asked if she preferred the car to go through the railing or if she'd prefer to stay. She told him about the night she finally fled, broken and desperate and absolutely certain that if she didn't leave that moment, she'd never leave at all. Sang-hun listened without expression, but something shifted in his eyes. A calculation happening behind the surface. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. He won't contact you directly again, Sang-hun said finally. I've made it clear that any harassment will result in legal action. But he may try other approaches. He may try to reach my company, my board, my reputation. When that happens, and it will, you let me know immediately. How are you so certain he'll try? Because men like him don't accept loss. They redefine it. They create new narratives where they're still in control. It's pathological. He'll either convince himself that I've kidnapped you, or that I've manipulated you, or that this is all part of some larger plan. He won't accept that you've simply chosen to leave. Predators can't accept that their prey has escaped. He stood and walked to the window, his silhouette framed against the city lights. I'm going to bed. The photographers come tomorrow morning. We need to look comfortable together. We need to look happy. Not like a real couple, don't misunderstand. But like two people who've made a mutual decision and respect each other. Can you do that? I think so, Tamara said. Good. He turned to leave, then paused. Your designer friend, the one from the boutique, they're reopening next month. I've arranged funding for their expansion. It's not because of you, understand. It's a good investment. But if you'd like to reconnect with them, the circumstances will be less suspicious now. He left before she could respond. Tamara sat in the empty dining room, surrounded by expensive food and expensive furniture and expensive loneliness, and realized something crucial. She'd made a deal with a man who understood power so completely that he could wield it like others wielded language. She'd agreed to spend a year in this beautiful cage because the alternative was worse. But there was something else happening underneath the transaction. Sang-hun had told her that her new life had begun. What he hadn't told her was that she'd already started to change it. The photographers came at dawn. They were polite but intrusive, directing them to pose on the balcony with the city spread below them. Sang-hun placed his hand on the small of Tamara's back, a gesture that was protective and possessive in equal measure. She leaned into it, not as acting, but as a physical response to finally feeling safe. The story ran that afternoon. Sang-hun, Seoul's most eligible bachelor, announces surprise marriage to fashion designer. The article described her as mysterious, talented, and from Lagos. It mentioned her designs, her vision, her passion. It was flattering in ways the media had never been toward her before. By evening, her old Instagram account, which she hadn't updated in months, had thousands of new followers. Boutiques she'd never approached were reaching out, requesting consultations. Within a week, she'd secured meetings with 3 major fashion houses interested in collaborating. Within 2 weeks, she designed a collection fusion, a dialogue between cultures that blended Nigerian textile traditions with Korean minimalist aesthetics. The pieces were revolutionary. Everyone said so. And slowly, gradually, something unexpected began to happen. Sang-hun stopped being a stranger. It started small. The first night she couldn't sleep, a nightmare about Manchik finding her. She wandered into the kitchen at 3 a.m. and found him there, making tea. Insomnia, he asked, not surprised to see her. Bad dream, she said. He had you killed? His tone was analytical, not cruel. He was trying. She sat across from him at the kitchen counter. It was a version of dreams where he'd finally done it and I was somehow watching from above. Sang-hun slid her a cup of tea. He won't kill you. That would be illogical. You're more valuable to him alive because then he can fantasize about reclaiming you. Death ends fantasy. He's not intelligent enough to accept that. Do you think I'm safe? She asked. Really? He considered this with the gravity of someone assessing genuine risk. Not absolutely. No one is absolutely safe. But safer here than you've been in years. And I have no financial incentive to lie to you about risk levels. My reputation depends on you being alive and well until our contract terminates. It should have been a depressing answer. Instead, it was comforting. The honesty of it was more reassuring than any romantic false promise could have been. Tell me about your background, she said. How did you become CEO of a tech empire? He smiled slightly, the first genuine smile she'd seen from him. You're developing feelings of curiosity about me? Should I not be? No, you should. It makes the marriage more believable. He settled into the chair beside her. My father was a politician. Not a good one. He made deals, broke them, made more deals. He was comfortable with moral flexibility. My mother was his third wife. He moved through women like other men move through cars. I was what he considered his most important business transaction because I was also his son, and he had plans for me. He took a slow sip of tea. I hated it. I had no interest in politics. I dropped out of university to start a tech company with a friend. My father cut me off financially. Said I was throwing away opportunity. I proved him wrong by making more money than he ever did. Then I ignored him for 15 years. He died 3 years ago. I didn't go to his funeral. That's cruel, Tamara said. It was logical. He wasn't defensive. He'd chosen not to be a father a long time ago. I chose not to mourn a stranger. Now I'm the CEO of a corporation that's worth more than some small countries. I have resources most people can't conceptualize. And I'm profoundly, deeply bored. She looked at him across the kitchen counter, this beautiful, powerful, emotionally unavailable man who decided to marry a stranger to solve both their problems. I don't believe you're bored, she said. What do you believe? I believe you're looking for something to believe in. And you've been looking so long that you've convinced yourself it doesn't exist. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he stood. Good night, Tamara. Try to sleep. Your body needs it even if your mind doesn't. He left her alone with her tea and her insight, and she realized that they'd had the first real conversation of their marriage. 3 months into the contract, everything changed, though Tamara didn't realize it was happening until it was too late to stop. It happened gradually, through accumulated moments that built into something neither of them had anticipated. It happened when she made jjigae for him, a Nigerian-Korean fusion stew, and he tried it and actually closed his eyes at the flavor. It happened when she found him awake at 3 a.m. again and sat with him in silence until 5 a.m., when he finally admitted that insomnia was a chronic condition that medications couldn't cure, that he sometimes felt like he was drowning in stillness. It happened when she designed a dress, and he commissioned a photographer to do a proper shoot, and the photos ended up being so beautiful that they went viral. It happened when a reporter asked him if he was proud of his wife, and instead of giving a prepared answer, he said, "Every day. She's the most courageous person I know." It happened during a business dinner when one of his board members made an inappropriate comment about her, and Sang-hun didn't just defend her. He destroyed the man's reputation with 3 sentences, turning the table's energy into something dangerous and protective. It happened when she woke up crying from another nightmare and found him holding her without her having to ask, his hand stroking her hair with an awkwardness that suggested he was learning how to comfort for the first time in his life. "I'm sorry," she whispered against his chest. This wasn't part of the contract. No, he agreed. It wasn't. But he didn't let go. By month 4, Manshik made his first mistake. He tried to reach her through Sang-hun's company, claiming to be a concerned friend worried about her well-being. Sang-hun's security team intercepted the call and traced it to a burner phone. They also discovered that Manshik had hired someone to photograph Tamara at various public events, building a surveillance file on her movements and activities. Sang-hun called a meeting in his home office, and for the first time since they'd married, his demeanor shifted entirely. The controlled businessman disappeared, replaced by something colder and far more dangerous. "He's escalating," Sang-hun said, showing her the photographs Manshik had collected. "He has images of you at 14 different locations over the past 2 weeks. He's tracking your patterns. He's looking for vulnerabilities." Tamara felt ice crystallize in her stomach. "What do? We let him see what he wants to see." Sang-hun's eyes were flat, devoid of the warmth that had been slowly building between them. "We make him believe he has an opening. And when he takes it, we close the trap." "That's dangerous," she said. "Yes. It's also the only way to end this. You can't hide forever, Tamara. Eventually, he'll find you, or he'll convince himself that you're better off dead than with someone else. We eliminate the threat now, or we spend the next decade looking over our shoulders." She'd never heard him speak about eliminating threats before, and the casual way he said it, like he was discussing scheduling a meeting, revealed something she'd been trying not to acknowledge. Sang-hun wasn't just a businessman. He was something else entirely. Something harder, something that had learned to move through violence the way other people moved through water. "What do I have to do?" she asked. "Nothing dangerous. You continue your life as normal. You go to the fashion event at the Latte World Tower next week alone. You'll be followed, but not by my people. My people will be positioned ahead of him. When he makes his move, we'll be ready. He's going to try to take me," Tamara realized. "Yes. And you're going to let him. Only far enough to be legally actionable. My lawyers are already prepared to file both restraining order violations and attempted kidnapping charges. But more importantly, I have resources that exist outside the legal system. He'll find it very difficult to try again after this." Tamara should have been terrified. Instead, she felt something like relief. Finally, an end. Finally, a way forward. The night before the event, she found Sang-hun on the balcony, looking out at the city with an expression she'd learned to recognize as him processing something difficult. "I can't promise you that this will be painless," he said without preamble. "And I need you to understand something. There's a version of me that you haven't met yet. A version that's capable of things that would horrify you. That version is going to protect you tomorrow. The question is whether you can look at me afterward and not see a monster." She moved to stand beside him, and after a moment, he took her hand. It was the first time he'd initiated physical contact that wasn't for the cameras. "I already know what you're capable of," she said. "I've known since you told me about your father. I've known since you mentioned your less legitimate resources. The difference between us isn't that I'm good and you're bad. The difference is that you learned to survive by becoming hard, and I learned to survive by becoming invisible. Neither of us is entirely innocent." He looked at her with something in his eyes that resembled vulnerability. "When this is over, if you want to leave, I won't stop you. The contract becomes void. I'll release you from everything. And if I don't want to leave, then we renegotiate. We become something real instead of something contractual." She squeezed his hand, but didn't promise anything. Some futures couldn't be promised. Some futures just had to be lived into. The Latte World Tower event was a charity gala, the kind of high society affair where Seoul's elite mingled among carefully curated art installations and unlimited champagne. Tamara wore a white dress that she designed herself, a piece so striking that photographers followed her from the moment she arrived. She was radiant and terrified in equal measure, aware that somewhere in the city, Sang-hun was watching through security feeds, waiting. She danced. She smiled. She accepted compliments on her designs. And all the while, she felt the weight of being a piece in someone else's game. But unlike before, when being a piece in Man-shik's game had felt like suffocation, this felt like strategy. She was complicit. She'd chosen this. The incident happened at 11:47 p.m., when she stepped away from the main ballroom to use the restroom. The service corridor was quiet, poorly lit, exactly the kind of place someone might attempt something desperate. Man-shik emerged from behind a service door, looking simultaneously exactly as she remembered him and completely transformed. His face was gaunt. His eyes had a manic quality. Addiction, perhaps, or madness, or some combination of the two. "Baby," he said, spreading his arms as if they were old friends. "I've missed you so much." Everything she'd felt, the fear, the rage, the violation, crystallized into a single, perfect moment of clarity. She'd spent so long being afraid of him. She'd organized her entire existence around his potential. And looking at him now, she realized something fundamental. He was pathetic. He was small. He was only powerful if she believed he was powerful. "Don't come closer," she said quietly. "We're leaving together. I have a car downstairs. We're going to disappear, go somewhere he can't find us, and we're going to be happy again like we were before." "We were never happy," she said. "You were just very good at pretending you'd broken my spirit so completely that I couldn't remember what happiness felt like. You're confused. That man has poisoned your mind. Once we get away from him, once I have you alone." He reached for her, and everything happened at once. Security guards emerged from hidden positions. Man-shik tried to run, but they were faster, more trained, more prepared. He was subdued with professional efficiency. There was no drama, no violence, just the careful precision of people who'd been trained to handle exactly this situation. Sang-hun appeared as Man-shik was being restrained, looking at the scene with the cool assessment of someone watching a problem being solved. When his eyes met Tamara's, there was a question in them. "Are you all right?" She nodded. And she was. Not because the threat had been eliminated, but because she'd faced it and hadn't shattered. Because she'd recognized his weakness, and in recognizing it, had reclaimed her power. Man-shik was taken away. The police arrived with lawyers who explained that he would be charged with attempted kidnapping, stalking, harassment, and violation of a restraining order. He would spend time in jail. He would not be easily released. And most importantly, he would never again have any legal right to approach her or know her location. The rest of the gala continued around them as if nothing had happened. That was the thing about Seoul's elite. They were experts at pretending inconvenient realities didn't exist. In the car on the way home, Sang-hun didn't speak. He simply held Tamara's hand and let her process everything that had happened. When they arrived at the penthouse, he led her to the bedroom and lay beside her as she cried, not from fear or trauma, but from the release of 3 years of tension finally breaking. "It's over," he whispered. "He can't hurt you anymore." "What did you do?" she asked. "To your security team, I mean." They responded so perfectly, so quickly. "I trained them," he said simply. Or rather, I hired people trained by organizations that most governments don't publicly acknowledge. When you have enough money, you can access resources that exist in the spaces between law and chaos. "Are you a good person?" she asked, the question that had been building for months finally emerging. "No," he said. "But I'm very good at protecting people I care about. Whether that makes me good or not depends on your definition." She didn't have a response to that. Instead, she fell asleep in his arms, and for the first time since fleeing Man-shik's apartment, she slept without nightmares. The next morning, the story broke. Man-shik's attempted kidnapping became a news item, then a scandal, then a morality play about the dangers of obsessive love and the powerlessness of the legal system. Tamara's past was dug up, examined, and ultimately positioned as a triumph, a woman escaping abuse, finding safety, building a new life. The narrative was sympathetic. The media coverage was protective. There was even a suggestion of heroism. Sang-hun's role in protecting her was acknowledged but minimized. He was positioned as the devoted husband, the strong man, the protector. No one mentioned the extent of his resources or the speed with which he'd responded. No one asked too many questions about how he'd known exactly when and where to intercept Manchik. A week later, Tamara was in her studio working on new designs when Sang-hun entered with an expression she'd learned meant he had something difficult to discuss. "Your immigration status has been permanently resolved," he said without preamble. "You're now eligible for permanent residency based on marriage to a Korean citizen. You can work without restrictions. You can build whatever you want here. Why are you telling me this? Because our contract was supposed to be 1 year. You've served 4.5 months. You were expecting 9 more months of obligation. That's no longer necessary. You're safe. You're established. You can leave if you want to." She set down her design tablet and looked at him directly. "Do you want me to leave?" "No." He said it simply, without qualification. "But I'm trying to be the kind of person who gives you the choice. I don't want to leave." She stood and moved closer to him. "But I also don't want to stay out of necessity anymore. I want to stay because I choose to." "What's changed?" "Everything," she said. "You've changed. Or maybe you haven't changed. Maybe you've just let me see who you actually are instead of who you pretend to be. And who you actually are is someone I want to know. Not because he's my protector or my contract or my escape route, but because he's interesting. Because he's learning to feel things he's spent his entire life not feeling. Because he held me while I cried and didn't make it weird." Sang-hun reached out and cupped her face in his hands, a gesture both tender and careful, like he was learning the texture of kindness for the first time. "I'm going to kiss you now," he said. "And it won't be for the cameras. It will be because I want to, and because I need to know if this thing between us is real or if we've both just become very good at playing roles." He kissed her carefully, with the precision he brought to everything, but there was something underneath the technique, a genuine searching, a real question being asked and answered. When he pulled away, his eyes were different. Softer. More human. "It's real," he said, and she understood he was confirming something for himself as much as for her. Month 5 through 7 passed in a blur of building something that neither of them had expected. Tamara's fashion line launched to critical acclaim. Her designs were featured in Vogue Korea, in international fashion magazines, in the closets of Seoul's most stylish women. She became known not just as Sang-hun's wife, but as a designer in her own right, someone with a unique vision, a fresh perspective, a voice that mattered. Sang-hun, meanwhile, began to change in ways that were both subtle and profound. He started leaving work earlier. He attended her fashion shows instead of sending representatives. He introduced her to his inner circle not as his wife, but as his partner, acknowledging her not just as a possession or an accessory, but as an equal. They moved through the penthouse like two people learning to coexist. The separate bedrooms became theoretical. They spent most nights together, not always sleeping, sometimes just talking about everything they'd been conditioned to hide. He told her about his childhood, about the political machinations he'd witnessed, about why he'd built his company as a way to gain enough power that he'd never be controlled by anything again. She told him about her family in Lagos, about the dreams that had brought her to Seoul, about the price of those dreams. They became intimate in ways that went far beyond the physical. Though there was physical intimacy too, passionate and tentative and real, without performance or pretense. For the first time in her life, Tamara understood what it meant to be desired not as an object or a prize, but as a complete person. And for the first time in his adult life, Sang-hun understood what it meant to be known and still accepted. But the world outside the penthouse was more complicated. The business press began to speculate about whether Sang-hun's marriage was genuine or a stunt. Some suggested he was losing his edge, becoming too sentimental to maintain his reputation as a ruthless CEO. Others questioned Tamara's credentials as a designer, suggesting she only had a platform because of her marriage. The backhanded compliments were endless. The subtle erosions of credibility were constant. It was during a particularly vicious piece in a business magazine, one that suggested Tamara had seduced her way into relevance, that something shifted inside Sang-hun. He read the article in their bedroom and went completely still. She'd learned to recognize this version of him. This was the version that existed outside the boundaries of their private world. This was the version that was capable of terrible things. "We're making an announcement tomorrow," he said, his voice flat and dangerous. "What kind of announcement?" "That we're divorcing. That our marriage was a business arrangement that has now concluded." Tamara felt like the ground had dropped out from beneath her. "What? Why?" I don't understand. Because you shouldn't be defined by this marriage, he said, and suddenly she understood. This was love, expressed in the only way a man like him knew how, through sacrifice and control and an attempt to protect her by removing himself from the equation. You're becoming a designer. You have potential that has nothing to do with me. And instead of letting you shine, I've kept you in my shadow. These articles are going to get worse before they get better. They'll attack you, attack us, attack everything we've built. I can't subject you to that. So you're ending it? Just like that? Without asking me what I want. What do you want? He asked, and it was a genuine question, not rhetorical. I want you to stop making decisions for me, she said fiercely. I just spent 3 years with a man who controlled every aspect of my life, and I swore I'd never do that again. I want a partner, not a protector. I want someone who lets me fight my own battles and trusts me to decide what I can handle. That's what I want from you. He was quiet for a long moment. I don't know how to do that. I don't know how to not protect you. You learn, she said. The same way I learned how to trust you. The same way you learned how to feel. We figure it out together, or we don't figure it out at all. But you don't make this decision for me, Sang-hun. Not if you actually want me to choose to stay. He sat on the edge of the bed, and for the first time since she'd known him, he looked genuinely vulnerable, unsure of himself, uncertain about the right path forward. I'm afraid, he said quietly, of what happens if I can't protect you. Of what it means if something bad happens and I didn't anticipate it. That's called being human, she said gently. Welcome to the club. We're all terrified. We just do it anyway. She sat beside him and took his hand. I'm not leaving. But if I'm going to stay, it has to be as someone equal to you. Not someone you're protecting or managing or controlling. Someone who gets a vote. Even if your vote is different from mine. Especially then. They didn't divorce. Instead, they called a press conference and shut down the narrative before it could solidify. Sang-hun announced that his wife was launching her own independent fashion brand with backing from investors beyond his company. Tamara announced that while she was grateful for his support, she wanted to be known for her designs, not for her marriage to a CEO. The narrative shifted. Suddenly, their marriage wasn't a liability, it was proof of their commitment to giving each other space. It was modern and evolved and exactly the kind of relationship that contemporary, powerful people were supposed to have. But more importantly, something changed between them. Sang-hun began to trust her judgment. When she wanted to take a risk with her designs, he didn't try to protect her from the potential consequences. He asked her what she needed from him and then provided exactly that without trying to control the outcome. And Tamara, for the first time since arriving in Seoul, began to build something entirely her own. Her fashion line, which she named Sanctuary, became known for its unique blend of traditional African textiles and Korean minimalism. Her designs told stories of displacement and belonging, of cultures colliding and creating something new, of finding home in unexpected places. Month 8 arrived with a milestone, 1 year from the day they'd accidentally married at the courthouse. The contract, as originally written, was supposed to end in 4 months. But as the date approached, neither of them mentioned it. The contract had become theoretical, a relic of a time when they needed legal structures to do what emotion should have done. That evening, Sang-hun took her to a restaurant on top of the Han River, with windows that overlooked the entire city. Seoul sprawled beneath them, millions of lives happening simultaneously, and here they were, two people who'd met in chaos and built something real from it. I never thanked you, he said, holding her hand across the table. For what? For crashing into me that day at the courthouse. For being desperate enough to accept an insane proposition. For staying even after Manshik was caught and you didn't have to. For teaching me that power is meaningless if you have no one to share it with. She smiled. I never thanked you either. For offering me safety when I had nowhere else to go. For protecting me without imprisoning me. For learning how to love when you'd convinced yourself it was impossible. I have something to ask you, he said, and he reached into his pocket. The ring was beautiful, not ostentatious, not trying to prove anything. Just a perfect, elegant circle of diamonds that caught the light like captured moments. I'm asking you to marry me again, he said. Not because of a contract or a legal obligation or a board demand. Because I want to. Because I want to build a life with you where we're both choosing each other every single day. Because I can't imagine a future where you're not in it. Tamara cried, Not from sadness or fear, but from the overwhelming relief of being chosen. Not rescued, not protected, not controlled. Chosen. Yes, she said. Yes, I will marry you. The wedding took place 6 months later at a venue that blended Korean and Nigerian traditions. There were traditional Korean ceremonies conducted with the same precision that characterized everything Sang-hun did, and there were Nigerian celebrations that brought color and music and chaos into the elegant venue. Tamara wore a gown that combined both aesthetics, white and gold, minimalist and rich, perfectly balanced between two worlds. Sang-hun watched her walk toward him with an expression of such complete presence that everyone in the room felt it. This was not the cold CEO anymore. This was a man who had learned to feel and had discovered that feeling was not weakness. It was power expressed in a different direction. When they exchanged vows, there were no theatrical promises. Instead, they spoke truth. I promise to see you, Tamara said. Not as the man I need to rescue me or the man I need to become, but as exactly who you are, strong and vulnerable, powerful and learning, perfect in your imperfection. I promise to let you choose, Sang-hun said. Every day, to let you choose me instead of trying to force you to need me. To trust your strength even when every instinct I have is to protect you from risk. To build a life with you, not a cage. The reception was joyful in ways that corporate events never are. Tamara's family had come from Lagos, her mother dancing with Sang-hun's business partners, her father sharing drinks with some of Seoul's most powerful men. For the first time in years, Tamara felt like she was exactly where she belonged. Late in the evening, Sang-hun pulled her aside to a quiet balcony overlooking the city. There's something I need to tell you, he said, and for a moment, panic fluttered in her chest. But then he smiled, that rare, genuine smile that had become more frequent over the past months. I've been thinking about stepping back from the CEO position, bringing in someone to eventually take over. I want time for other things. Like what? She asked, surprised. Like watching you build your empire. Like traveling to places I've never been. Like having the freedom to be something other than a problem solver and power broker. Like being a husband who gets to spend time with his wife without it being scheduled around business obligations. It was such a profound shift from the man he'd been that she almost didn't recognize it. But then she did. This was what real change looked like. Not a dramatic transformation, but a gradual reorientation of priorities. A man learning that there were more important things than control. I'd like that, she said. Though I expect you'll be bored within a month. Probably, he agreed. But I'd rather be bored with you than lonely at the top of an empire. 1 year into their real marriage, Tamara's fashion line had expanded across Asia. She opened flagship stores in Seoul, Tokyo, and Shanghai. She was invited to fashion weeks across the globe. She was recognized on the street as a designer, not as a CEO's wife. She'd built something entirely her own, something that mattered. Sang-hun had stepped back from day-to-day operations at his company, promoting a brilliant woman named Lee Ji-won to CEO. He spent his time on board positions, angel investments, and more importantly, being present in a way he'd never been before. He attended every fashion show. He traveled with Tamara to design conferences. He learned to exist in her world instead of expecting her to exist in his. But more than that, he learned to be vulnerable. There were still nights when insomnia plagued him, and Tamara would find him on the balcony looking out at the city. She'd sit beside him, and they'd talk about fear and legacy and the weight of expectation. He'd learned that these moments, the quiet conversations, the shared vulnerability, were more valuable than all the power he'd accumulated. One evening, as they sat in their bedroom in the penthouse, looking out at Seoul's endless lights, Tamara asked him something she'd been wondering. Do you regret it? Marrying me the first time, I mean. Even though it was an accident. He was quiet for a long moment. No. I've been searching for something my entire life, some way to make the accumulation of power feel meaningful. I thought it would happen when I surpassed my father, when I became the most successful person in my circle, when I had enough resources to never be vulnerable again. But none of that worked. Then you crashed into me at a courthouse, and I realized that meaning doesn't come from achievement. It comes from being known by someone and accepted anyway. It comes from finally finding someone who sees you and doesn't ask you to be anything other than what you are. Even when what you are is ruthless and calculating and sometimes terrifying, even then. He pulled her closer. Because you taught me that ruthlessness without compassion is just cruelty. And I'm learning slowly, imperfectly, but learning how to be strong without needing to dominate. How to be powerful without needing to control. That's the gift you gave me. I didn't give you anything, she said. You chose to change. No, he said gently. I chose to change because you made me believe it was possible. That's everything. The years that followed were marked by a quiet kind of happiness that neither of them had expected. Tamara's brand became internationally recognized. She won design awards, was featured in documentaries, became one of the most influential voices in contemporary fashion. But more importantly, she'd built a life where her success was entirely her own. No one could take that away. No one owned it but her. Sang-hun, meanwhile, discovered something unexpected: contentment. He was no longer the coldest man in Seoul. People remarked on how he'd changed, how he'd developed warmth, how he seemed almost human now. He didn't care about the gossip. He was too busy building something different with his resources, a foundation that helped women escaping domestic abuse, providing legal support, housing, and opportunities to rebuild their lives. It was personal work that only made sense to someone who understood the cost of not having options. When journalists asked him about the foundation, he would give credit to his wife, not as a hollow gesture, but because it was true. Tamara had shown him what it meant to fight to survive and choose grace in the aftermath. Everything he did was informed by knowing her, by understanding her strength. 5 years after they'd met at the courthouse, they found out that Tamara was pregnant. It wasn't planned exactly, but it was welcomed. She continued working through most of the pregnancy, adjusting her designs, creating while she could. Sang-hun, who'd never considered himself particularly paternal, found himself reading books on fatherhood and planning a nursery that was somehow both elegant and warm, a reflection of the balance they'd learned to create in their life together. Their daughter, born on a spring morning with Seoul's cherry blossoms falling outside the hospital window, was named Nia, a nod to Tamara's Nigerian heritage and her father's minimalist aesthetic. She had her mother's eyes and her father's serious expression, and from the moment Sang-hun held her, something shifted in him. The last remaining cold places in his heart seemed to warm. Tamara watched him hold their daughter and felt something like completion. This man who'd learned to feel, holding the proof of their love, and understanding that the contract that had brought them together had transformed into something far more real and precious than either of them could have imagined. Do you remember what you said to me? She whispered as he rocked Nia gently. When you offered me the contract, you said no emotional involvement. He smiled, that rare, genuine smile that still made her heart catch. I remember. I was lying. I'd already become emotionally involved from the moment you looked at me with desperate hope at the courthouse. I was just too afraid to admit it. What changed? You did, he said simply. You kept showing up. You kept choosing me even when you didn't have to. You kept being brave when I was afraid. You taught me that the thing I'd feared most, being known, being vulnerable, being dependent on another person for happiness, was actually the thing I needed most. Their daughter slept between them, peaceful and perfect and entirely unaware of the journey her parents had taken to get here. Outside, Seoul sprawled in all its complexity, millions of lives intersecting, some meeting by accident, some by design, some through the intervention of fate and desperation and the simple grace of being seen by another person. Tamara thought about the woman she'd been 5 years ago, running through courthouse hallways with no future and no options. She thought about the fear, the desperation, the moment when she'd had nothing left to lose. And she thought about how sometimes the most important moments of our lives come disguised as disasters. How sometimes running into the wrong person at exactly the right moment can redirect your entire existence. She reached over and took Sang-hun's hand, the same hand that had caught her when she'd stumbled at the courthouse. The same hand that had signed a contract she didn't intend to sign. The same hand that had learned, over time, to be gentle. I love you, she said. I know, he replied. And I'm learning how to love you back. Every day, I'm learning. Outside, Seoul glittered in the darkness, and inside their penthouse apartment that was no longer a cage but a home, a family breathed together, two people who'd found each other by accident and built something real, something that would endure. This is the story they would tell their daughter someday. Not as a fairy tale, but as proof that sometimes the most transformative things in our lives come from collisions we don't see coming. That sometimes the people who change us arrive without warning. And that sometimes the most powerful love stories are the ones built on survival, on choosing each other repeatedly, on learning to trust when trust had been broken, and on discovering that vulnerability is not weakness, but the truest form of strength. If Tamara and Sang-hun's journey from contract marriage to real love moved you, if you found yourself holding your breath during the dangerous moments and smiling during the intimate ones, please subscribe to this channel. We bring you stories of resilience, romance, and redemption. Stories of people who transform themselves and each other. Stories that remind us that the most powerful things in life are often the ones we stumble into unexpectedly. Like this video if you believe in second chances and found homes in unexpected places. Comment below and tell us, what would you have done if you were Tamara? Would you have accepted Sang-hun's contract? What would you have needed to feel safe? Subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a story. Because the best stories are the ones that stick with us long after they end, the ones that make us believe in the possibility of transformation, the ones that remind us that even when we're running from our pasts, we might be running toward our futures. Thank you for watching The Contract Bride of Soul. We'll see you in the next story.